think that's where it's coming from.
Yeah, so you guys are all water sewer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Greg
He was in New York.
The same thing? Oh, well, you and I have. I did 2 weeks ago, I was in the emergency room and I went to the hospital and had surgery.
Why keep it in the refrigerator? Oh, I don't have like a holster or anything. Yeah, I like my food to buy.
His little mini fridge in his office.
Are we
Smells
ready to
pretty
start
cool.
then? Or do you have anybody else joining you from your team?
Ma'am, I think we're good on our end.
Okay. Then I am going to call this special meeting to order for Monday, November 19 at 2018. Time being 5:33 p.m. First item of business will be roll call.
Mayor Christie Melendez,
Here,
Mayor Pro Tem Ken Bennett,
Here.
Miles Baker, Barry Wilson,
Here.
Paul Rennemeyer,
Here?
Tom Jones,
Here.
David Sosowski.
Here.
okay. Our second item is review of agenda by the board and addition of items of new business to the agenda for consideration by the board. Is there anything different or new anybody wanted to propose? If not, I would seek a motion.
Move the agenda be approved as submitted.
Second.
Motion on the floor from Mr. Sosowski with a second from Mr. Wilson approving the agenda as presented. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda is approved as presented. So moving on then to our board action this evening. This evening we will start with presentation and discussion of water acquisition. And John Thornhill's going to be presenting it. He's our water resources manager. So I'll turn it over to you, John.
Okay. So today we're going to talk a little bit about water resources, demand and supply. I'm going to start with giving just an overview of where our water is coming from. You've probably seen most of the first few slides. I'll go over it again though, where we get our water, where we treat our water, and then I'll go into a water master plan discussion where we'll kind of do a review of the water master plan. If you have any questions regarding strategy or anything, kind of hold those off until we get a little bit further down the road. This is more of just a review section for the beginning. So, agenda, I kind of just went over that, so we'll talk water system overview, master plan, future strategies, and then we'll go into rates and fees with Dean's presentation afterwards. So, water system overview. Windsor gets its treated water from 3 different water providers. As you know, we don't have our own water treatment plant, so we have to get others to provide that service for us and treat that water and deliver that water to us, but it is Windsor's water. They own the water outright. They just transfer that water to the providers, and then the providers treat and deliver that water to our customers. Those 3 providers are the City of Greeley, Fort Collins Level Water District, and Northwell County Water District. Somebody have a question?
Yeah, and I was gonna say, just for clarification, so it is all CBT, right? When we're talking.
It's all CBT right now.
It's all CBT.
Yeah. Which we'll kind of go in the master plan discussion.
So John, why do we have 3, for instance? Why wouldn't we just go to 1 and say, we need, what's the number, there's 722 million gallons, can you treat all 722? Is it because they can't? And so we have to go to another one, or?
Well, the answer I would give now is, you know, I don't know a lot of the history of the back of time, but each one of those contracts, we already have kind of bought into that system, or they actually gave us capacity in their system, so if we left and just went with one provider, we'd actually be giving up a lot of plant capacity and treatment capacity that we would then have to go purchase somewhere else, so how the history of that came about, I'm not quite sure, but that's kind of where we ended up.
Well,
Dennis might have a little bit more to add to that.
And I think there'd also be a willingness too from the other three providers, you know, they may have Windsor banked at a certain capacity, and so if we wanted to up, we'd probably have a pretty big system charge if they take it at all.
Yeah.
Do the contracts permit us to actually go higher than what's there? So if we went to Greeley and say we need 250, they'd say, okay?
We can go up in those, but there would be a charge associated with that, same kind of like, that's called the system development charge with Greeley, so it's based on the equivalent 3/4 inch tab, so, you know, since you're putting more demand on their system, they're gonna charge you a like amount for, it's kind of like a plant investment fee based on the plant investment
So
fee.
it sounds like the current contract says $212 million.
That's where our current base is set at.
Is that our take or pay amount?
Our take or pay amount is 400 million gallons a year.
Right, or, no,
What?
400 acre feet.
400 acre feet a year, and then, but I think our base allotment now with the capacity that we bought into the system is around 650 acre feet. So we've gone above that 400.
So that's Greeley.
That's Greeley. And then, Fort Collins Loving, I think is the 110. We take, that's a take or pay, and we take that every year flat. And then Northwell, we're significantly below what Northwell's amount that we could take from them, since we now have another master meter in the ground. I'll show you what that is as well.
Just to answer the history question, we originally, back in 1978, we joined forces with Fort Collins Loveland. And we, at that time, we were gonna build a treatment plant with them,
Donuth Reservoir?
Donis Reservoir. But that didn't work out, but we've got all the infrastructure running to them right now. So, you know, to abandon that, to go to another supplier, didn't make sense.
Yeah, I think somebody did the math for me, but right now we're treating about 720 million gallons a year, so that's kind of where we're at right now. You can see our growth over time and just total annual demand. You can see that rapid growth in the 90s and demand going up pretty fast. And then kind of leveling off. Here's the drought in the early 2000s where everybody was restricting the water use in the low drought shadow. And then we kind of flatlined a little bit. This is really a factor of, you know, a change in policy where we moved to requiring dual use systems. And, you know, back in the 80s, you know, we only had a few hundred dual use taps, and now we have actually more dual use taps than we do potable taps. Here's a map of the system in general, so you can see, here's Windsor right here, here's, I think, oh, my pointer's not working. Here's I-25, Highway 14, just to get you oriented, here's Highway 34. This is our build-out service area, our Windsor water service area. Here are the treatment plants, here's Greeley's Bellevue treatment plant, that's their year-round treatment plant. Here's the Tri-Districts or Soldier Canyon Water Treatment Plant. This is where the Northwell water is treated and the Fort Collins Loveland Water District water is treated. And then Greeley's Boyd Lake Treatment, which is basically their peaking plant. It provides that summertime irrigation use to Windsor or to Greeley or to any of their outside customers as well.
Sorry, John, you said Northwell is treated at our district.
Yeah, Northwell and Fort Collins Loveland Water District water is treated at Soldier Canyon Water Treatment Plant, which is right here.
And Northwell said they were gonna expand that treatment plant for up to whatever 20 million gallons a day. Is that the plant they're talking about?
That's the plant we're talking about.
Okay.
And then here are all where all the master meters are located at. This is the new Northwell master meter location, right there just south of County Road 74 or Harmony Road, just west of the County Line Road. The other master meters located right here for Northwell. Here's that Fort Collins Loveland master meter that we were just discussing. And then the three Greeley master meters on the south side are right here. So that's how Windsor gets all its water, through these master meters. Any questions on that? So here's a little water service area map. You look at this darker yellowish brown color, that was our 1980 water service area, pretty small. expanded pretty rapidly in 2015. You can now see that we're a lot bigger water service area, and then this yellow is the ultimate water service area. That would be it filled out. Our average daily winter demand right now is about 1.3 MGD or million gallons per day. And then our peak summer demand gets upwards around 4 MGD per day. Might even be a little bit more than that. And again, here are those tab numbers that I was just referencing. If you look back, even in 2003, almost all of our taps, residential taps, were single source taps, so they'd be potable water indoor and outdoor. And then we had a few dual source taps. If you look at that mix now in 2018, we actually exceeded the amount of those single source taps. So that's a pretty good success story for the town of Windsor, I think, to really lower that water use. And you
John,
see
can I
that-
ask, sorry.
Yeah.
Why is it that during the summer, if we have that many dual source, non-potable to water, et cetera, why is it that we still have the summer demand so big in the summer if we're,
Because we still have 3,100 single source taps.
Yeah, that's still, 10,000 residents, a third of our population is still using water outdoors.
okay.
So it's gonna go up, it'd go up twice as much if they were all single source taps, so.
Okay.
It's a good question.
But if you look at it in terms of gallons per person per day or gallons per capita per day, you can see that success story pretty clearly. Population's on the left side of the graph, GPCD is on the right. This gray line is our population increase, so starting back in 1988, around 5,000 people, we'll probably end up around 30,000 this year. But look at that GPCD, in the late 80s, it was well over 170, and now we're sitting in around the 80s. So that's a pretty good success story. If the town had not done that, we would have to be treating all of that water, and all of our costs would be twice as much as they would be today. So that's a pretty big success story, I think. Water use by customer class, here's another way to look at it. On the left side is demand by customer class, so this is looking at all basically our customer classes on how much water each class uses. So the blue is our residential class, so they're using 70% of our water, 70% of our demand is that residential water class. 9% commercial, 10% industrial, 9% for landscape-only accounts, and then the other remaining 1.5% is schools, churches, and out-of-town users.
What would be an example of a landscape only account?
Dennis?
A lot of our commercial and industrial accounts, they have 2 meters. One meters the water they use inside their business, and then another meter that measures only the landscape, so that's the landscape only.
Is that for their sewer charge? Because like sewer companies will, they'll read your meter and charge you a capacity charge or usage charge. So big outdoor waters are smart to basically separate those out, so they're not paying sewer charges for landscaping.
It's also a good conservation measure to have that use separated so that you can identify those inefficiencies, especially on the outdoor use by having an irrigation-only tap, especially if you're doing a large area. So it's good business practice. But if you look at the taps per class, you can see that our residential class overwhelmingly is the majority of our taps. 94% of our taps are residential accounts. It basically points out that we're kind of a bedroom community with rooftops mostly.
Do we know, this I know is big in Tom and I's district, which is people using well water to irrigate. They've got their own well on their property. Do we know how many people are irrigating with their own well and not really using potable water to do that?
I don't think we know that.
I don't know if we know, we could get a rough number of it, of the residential wells that are around here, and I think they're mostly in this area that
Right.
we're gonna use, but it's not a big number, I don't think anymore. A lot of those aren't working real well now anyway, but they are still something used, and you'll see the signs in front of yards too, as you go around town, but we could try to figure that out.
I was just curious if we knew or had that somewhere, how many people are using well.
Yeah, I think I saw a number somewhere, but I can't quite remember what it was, but I don't think it was more than a couple hundred at most.
Is there, anybody that's using well, is their system set up to be able to use potable if the well does dry up or isn't producing? Or?
I know a lot of them have the single source taps as well, so they could run a sprinkler system like you normally would set up with a single source. In fact, I think some of them are doing that today because their well's not working or won't work for very long, and then they switch to their portable tap.
So it's becomes a single tap?
Yeah, it'll become a single tap.
Just curious on, maybe we'll talk about it later in cash and lieu, because we certainly know what we all talked about in residential. Do we require commercial development to bring cash and lieu, bring water when they're building?
Yep.
Just-
Now, we'll evaluate those on a case-by-case basis, depending on what they're coming in, what they think their demand use is, what we calculate it to be, and then they can pay the 50% borrow water, 50% cash.
Yeah, so they get the same.
As we stated earlier, of course, all of Windsor's current treatable water sources are CBT. You know, we outright own a little over 3,800 units of the Colorado Big Thompson project. We also own about 490 units of North Poudre, and I've got this on another slide as well. Each share of North Poudre comes with 4 units of CBT water, so do the math there. A little over 5,800 units of CBT that we utilize on any given year. This is a project map of the CBT system. I won't go into big detail, but it basically takes water from the west slope of the Colorado River and brings it over to the east slope to serve this entire like greenish color area. So, and here's Windsor right here in the middle. Talking about cash and lieu and CBT prices, you know, one of the things that we keep a good watch on is the CBT price, and this is just this year for March. You can see we were sitting around 28,000 or so per unit, and now that cost is over. The last bid that I put in here was over $36,000 per unit, so that's how much it's increased just since March. And I expect that it's going to go up even more. But Windsor does set their cash and lieu based on the market price of CBT right now, which I think, Jess, we're charging them $6,800. 6,877 per tap right now for that 50% of our water for that residential house, and that's based on this price right there.
Does it adjust monthly or?
Yeah, I'll talk about that when I get to the master plan, but at least it does.
Talk later, I'm guessing, on bidding strategies.
We'll do all that at executive. Okay, so now I'm gonna go into and specifically just kind of do a review of the master plan. This is the 2009 water master plan that the town had done with Clearwater Solutions. You know, and basically it was born out of, you know, there was a concern by having that one-dimensional water supply. You know, we've got all our eggs in one basket right now, which is the CBT system. You know, what happens if the interstate compacts come into call and we gotta reduce our usage so they can put more water down the Colorado River? What happens if there's a large fire around Horseshoe that contaminates the reservoir? What are we gonna do if half our supply is cut off? So, you know, it's good that we started to look at those things. It also gave us a focused plan for acquisition. What actual water should we be out going and buying and trying to get if we're not gonna have just one supply? It looked at reviewing our water dedication policy. It looked at how much NIST do we need to participate in, you know, how much water do we actually need to get? Alternatives to funding for NIST and really identify a target water portfolio. So we'll kind of go through those things. The goal of the plan is to provide you guys, decision makers, with the information you need to make sound decisions associated with the water portfolio and that best position the town in the future. And just to point this out, this was kind of, you know, one of the things that came out of the plan too. Although the town encourages growth, grows pace its own way. So it was trying to look at that plan through that lens of that, hey, we need to do all these things, but we want growth to pay its own way. So let's go back and look at where we're at right now. Current treatable water supply. Again, I talked about all the CBT units that we own. That's our whole treatable water supply. So right now, we outright own 3,859 units. The water resources folks, I'm gonna probably start changing units on you guys because I talk in acre feet, so everything I'm gonna talk about is in acre feet. So just get used to it. We talk about, you know, yield of water supplies and water rights, and there's usually 3 yields that we look at. We look at the average yield. It's the yields you're gonna get in most years, you know? Maybe 9 out of 10 years, 8 out of 10 years, that's the yield you're gonna get. Firm yield is the yield you're gonna get during that drought, that really horrible 6-year drought. The yields, you know, in any single year, like, I think 2002, 2003, the CBT yield was like 50%, so we're talking, that's what firm yield is. And then planting yield is whatever the entity decides that they're gonna use in terms of planting, like how much risk do you wanna take? The town decided to use a different planting yield number than a lot of entities will use the firm yield number. That's really conservative, you know? If you're getting down to that yield, then everybody's got issues. It's not just gonna be you, it's everywhere. So average yield for CBT units is a 70% quota. So that's the average yield that we use. Firm yield is a 50% quota, so you're only gonna get half of your water supply. So if each Colorado Big Thompson unit is a 1 acre-foot unit, if there's an average yield, you're gonna get 0.7 acre-feet. Firm yield, you're gonna get half, 0.5 acre-feet. And then the planting yield that was used in the master plan was 0.6. So all of
Sorry, what?
0.6, so all of the yields that we talk about in the master plan, it used a 60% quota for the CBT units. Okay? And the North Pooter Company is the same way, North Pooter Irrigation Company. For every share of North Pooter you get, it comes with 4 units of CBT, and then the same yields apply. So average yield, we took those 4 units times 0.7, that's the yield you get, 2.8 acre-feet, I think. Firm yield, 50%. So that gives us a total CBT supply of 5,818 units. And then here's the yield in acre-feet, so yields on the left side of the graph. Average yield, we're a little over 4,000 acre-feet for an average year. Firm yield, we're a little under 3,000, so I think it's about 2,900 or so acre-feet in firm yield. So if it got really bad, really dry, that's kind of what we would be planning on, is 2,900 acre-feet of water. Right now, demand's about 2,000 acre-feet, so you're starting to get really close. And then planting yield, we're about 3,490 or so acre-feet for planting yield.
John, if we're getting the CBT water from our CBT units or North Pooter, can either one of them be treated out, all 3 of those?
Yeah, that's the beauty of the CBT system, so we can actually get that water to all of those treatment plant locations. Both the Greeley's plants, you can go down the Pooter and go down to Big Thompson as well. So we do have a little flexibility with some of our providers to be able to move that water around. If you have a problem, like for example, when we had the 2013 floods and then all those subsequent rains were bringing all that burn material down, you know, the Bellevue plant had to keep shutting down, and then that water was being picked up and treated by Soldier Canyon or the Boyd plant and delivered to the customers. So they were routinely shutting that plant down in 2013 every few days because of rains. So it was good that we could get that supply to any plant. Any other questions on yield? So, a master plan and determining future demand, it was based on our comprehensive plan at the time, at build out. So it didn't look at, you know, this year we're gonna have 5,000 people and then 10,000 and 12, it just said, here's where you're at today, here's what build out is, per your comprehensive plan, how much water are you gonna need? And that was based on about 102,000 residents filling that plan out. Here's our current potable demand in 2017. We have about 2,000 acre-feet of demand. Now we have to add in those losses, so that's the amount of water that it takes to get that water to the treatment plants. You lose some water in the treatment process. You lose some water in the transmission lines coming to the town. We add those losses in. That's the water you actually need at the plant. So demand at the tap is what is used in the city. Demand at the plant is what we actually need to get to the plant to feed that demand in the town. And this master plan came out and said the build-out potable demand total would be 12,500 acre-feet. That does not include those 26% losses that I just discussed, but we'll look at that in a little more detail here.
What is the assumption then on single tap versus double tap on that build out?
Like the mix of those?
Right, I mean, so.
It assumes that almost all of them will be dual use taps.
Okay.
There's a little bit, and I'll show you in the table coming out, there's some acreages that, it did assume that there'd be some that wouldn't have access to a non-potable irrigation system, but not a lot.
So you assuming about 86,000 gallons a year.
Yeah,
For
for the
us.
.29, I think it's like 90,000 or something,
Yeah.
depending on how to do the calculation, but yeah. So it looked at our comprehensive plan, it looked at the land use types and the area, so we had an acreage for each of those land use types. It only looked at what Windsor's water service area would provide. We didn't look at any areas that were in North Wales water service area or Fort Collins Loveland water service area. They're gonna serve a little bit of that population in the future. And then it took that acreage of these land use types and multiplied it by a water use factor that the town provided. So we went in and looked at our utility billing, and we said, on average, commercial accounts of this type use X amount of water per acre, apply that times the acreages, you come up with a demand. Residential use, you can come up with a demand. And that doesn't include any non-potable demands at all in this analysis. So then we come up with a big fancy table that has all of those land use codes, the amount of gross acres that were in that land use code. The Windsor net acres, that's removing any of those that might be outside of our water service area. So we got our actual Windsor water service area acreage. The number of homes, that's used mainly to calculate what the indoor number would be. And then we can come up with our potable demand. So our indoor demand was taking the number of homes times 2.78 or 2.8 persons per home times 365 days a year. And then we come up with a demand for indoor use. It also calculated the number of irrigated acres. That's those small areas that just probably couldn't have a non-potable system with them, and then we'd have to do a single-use tap for those. Calculated a little bit of outdoor acres. That's based on the evapotranspiration rate of bluegrass, so they assigned 2.25 acre feet per acre for that bluegrass requirement. That gives you your outdoor demand, and then you get your total acre feet, and there's that 12,500 right there. And you can see even then, if you added up all the residential, it'll match what we're kind of doing today. You know, the vast 70% of our demand in the future is still gonna be residential.
But again, this was based on the 102,000.
Based on the 102,000.
Number,
yeah.
okay.
But
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, and just tell me again, how did we arrive at 102,000 population? I think I understand, but I just want to make certain I.
That was based on the lane,
Yeah, that was the comp
Land use
plan.
policy.
that was the
Yeah.
comp plan. Yeah.
Okay,
So that's how many people you could fit in those areas based on our land use code set.
so we're saying this land is zoned for residential, we could estimate how many homes, how much water? That
Yeah,
was-
we had
Okay.
a little more detail, like it was, mixed use residential versus high
Right.
density residential versus
Right.
low density, and then we could apply
And I think
a
you said
density factor.
we multiplied those acres times the average amount of water used for that type of a land use. Is that what I understand?
For the commercials and stuff, for residential, it's a little bit easier. Once you know the density of each one of those
Okay.
classes, you can calculate how many homes.
Right.
So like, medium density residential might be 6.6 homes per acre.
Okay.
So then we can figure out the
X amount
density,
of water per.
the amount of taps, and then we of course can calculate a indoor gallons per capita per day number to those taps, because those taps can be used to calculate a population, then we get an indoor demand.
Is the number really an arithmetic compared, I mean, at 60,000, do we just take 60%?
You're always jumping ahead of me,
Yeah,
Dan.
you're like,
You got it.
That's what I wanted.
You got it. Yep. So, projected gap, so they got this total demand at 12,500. We add in that surcharge, the 26% shrink. I'm gonna start calling it shrink just because that's the name that we use. So 15,800 is what you would need if you grow to 102,000 and you fill in that area just like we planned. Roughly, that's the amount of water we're gonna need at build out.
Is that a typical loss? I mean, that sounds high.
It is an average loss, and in some places, if you're up by Bellevue or Soldier Canyon, the loss is gonna be less, 5-10%. But losses to the Boyd treatment plant are much higher, because you're being affected by the historical ditch company that actually owns those structures to get the water into the plant, and their loss is 22%. And then if you carry any over water, that's additional loss on top of it. So if that water, whether it's being carried over at Horsetooth or carried over Boyd Lake or wherever it might be carried over, you have an additional wintertime loss of 10 to 11% as well. So they just kind of averaged all those losses, and that's what they come up with. You know, just transmission distribution losses, like after it comes out of the plant, you're looking at, you know, anything less than 10% is a pretty good number, actually.
It's expensive.
Yeah. It adds up though, if you can get those losses down, yeah, you can save a lot of water.
Yeah.
For sure. So in 2009, this is just still looking at just what the master plan said. We had a supply of 2,900 acre feet. It assumed we were gonna participate in this at 3,300 acre feet. And then it assumed we'd still acquire a little bit more CBT just through our normal dedication process and stuff of 861 acre feet. That leaves a gap at 8,700 plus acre feet, if you, at full build out. So that's 8,700 acre feet of some other supplies that we would have to go on the clock to get to 102,000.
Did you, I'm sorry, did you take into, I mean, if in fact the housing density is as your forecast, where you said, you know, medium density, high density, so many households, but of course, every one of those developments would have brought water or cash to the table. So did you add in the acre feet that could have been?
I think at some point they assumed they wouldn't be, and it would be provided by like the NISP, for example. Or you would, but if you wouldn't change any of your policies, so those policies, we would still have the same requirement, is that kind of what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, that would be, that 8,700 would be our total nut. You're right, that like the developers, because they come in, they
Yeah.
have to dedicate some, but that's our total what number,
Yeah,
whether
so-
or not we're doing it,
Where
we
it
do
comes
100% fee and lows.
Yeah.
so-
However you get to it, the demand would be the same.
But you made some assumption around the number of households that will be in place, right?
Yes, and that was in the
And we
tables.
can,
Yeah.
currently, under current policy, every one of those households, the developers would have had to have brought half the water, so that would be there.
If you kept the policy though.
Yeah.
And I
Well-
think the policy might have changed though.
And I would say that that's also presuming that there's that much water out there. I don't think
Right.
there's that much CBT
Right, like,
Yeah.
left.
it assumed for the CBT system that there would be no more CBT left after 2025. So they would say CBT's gone. It's all been bought up or dedicated or whatever, you gotta go get something else now.
I think the slide that Deck started with, the slide that said growth pays for itself.
Yeah.
Now, maybe his response is, well, I'm very sorry, there's no more CBT left. Go get maybe.
And we'll get into that
It's not our
discussion
problem.
in a little bit. you know,
Okay.
in executive, yeah. So gap, 8,700 acre feet.
Yeah.
So recommendations for meeting the gap, continue to get as much CBT as you can in the interim. And North Poudre, same thing, you're getting CBT units for that, if you can purchase those. You did say go out and you should really evaluate water supply and storage company. That's water that can be treated at Soldier Canyon, that's water that can be treated at Greeley's Bellevue plant. Good water supply, very senior yield, something that the town should look at, and I think we should still look at. And it said also go talk to the Windy Gap participants as well. And then it also assumed that those sources would be treated by Northwell at Soldier Canyon, which is our least cost of service treatment provider, unless we build our own water treatment plant, which you guys have had discussions about that in the past. So just in pie chart form, here's that total water rights portfolio. You can actually see the mix of those water rights. The light blue color on the top, that's just CBT that you currently owned at the time in 2009. And then you need a new CBT or NPIC in the orange, another 716 acre feet. It lowered it a little bit because it assumed some was gonna come in on dedication. The 3,300 acre feet of NISP, 878 you were gonna get from water conservation measures, from your water efficiency plans. And then that other 8,000 acre feet has to come from something else, water supply and storage, Windy Gap, any of the other ditch systems, Greedy Loveland maybe. So you'd have to go out and find that other water somewhere else. Just to give you some idea on costs of some of those water supplies today, NPIC and CBT, of course, are both obviously based on CBT. This is looking at the firm yield number though, so the cost is a little inflated, but this is how the master plan did it at the time, so I just updated this table. You can see that Cadillac of water supplies is pretty expensive right now. Whisk, pretty cheap, $20,800. That's based on the firm annual yield of 45 acre feet per share. You can get that up to that average yield, 65 acre feet per share, if you had your own storage bucket. So you'd be firming that supply, you could actually have a firm yield supply of 65 to 70 acre feet but you gotta have a bucket to get there, so that cost could be a lot cheaper if you had somewhere to store it and firm up that supply. Larimer well, pretty cheap, but difficult to work with. Windy Gap firming, that's probably a low number, that probably number's a lot more expensive, because you also gotta go out and actually buy the Windy Gap shares from somebody as well, so that's just to get into the firming project, which that cost keeps going up, just like NISP does, so. And then, of course, the NISP cost, the latest estimate, you know, we were sitting at around 1.2 billion for the total project. For Windsor's share, that's about 100 million right now, 99 million. But around 30,000 acre feet of firm yield, that doesn't include interest or debt service though. So key findings and recommendations from the master plan, it did say alter your water dedication calculations to include those losses. The town did that, so we are charging those losses now, so whenever somebody comes in and wants to build something in Windsor, we actually add that 26% to that requirement. So, you know, the normal requirement for a single-family residential dual-use system tap in Windsor is 0.25 acre feet. With the loss, we ask for 0.29 acre feet. That's the dedication requirement. They can pay 50% of that in raw water. They can give us 50% of it in cash right now, which is the second bullet point, shift to that policy. You see that it says stop doing it in 2015. The reason why they said that, because NISP was supposed to be online in 2015. So that's when you would shift to a 100% cash and lieu policy. But obviously NISP is not online yet, so we're still continuing to take in 50/50. And it said evaluate the cash and lieu price each year and set that on the CBT price. We're still doing that, except now we set it on a quarterly basis, and in fact, the last couple of months, we're setting it on a monthly basis because it's climbing so fast. And so we want to keep as close to that market price as possible, so that when we actually go out and actually buy some of that CBT water, we're not losing too much money when we go to do that.
John, I'm sorry, but if you can move back one slide, or at least, what's WSSC again?
Water Supply and Storage Company. I guess I should tell you where it is. If you look at Windsor, just to the north of us is the New Cash Irrigation Company, coming along 392, right? If you go up to County Road 74, that's the Larimer Well Ditch Company that goes all the way out to the east and 85. You go along Highway 14 to the north side there and a little bit south side, that's the Water Supply and Storage Company that follows Highway 14. So those are the three big ditch companies that are north in northern Colorado.
And they have shares for sale, or?
Yeah, Water Supply and Storage Company,
Well, they're owned privately, like, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
they're still a private ditch company. There's 600 total shares in the company, okay? Now, this is the company that Thornton went out and bought half the company of in the 80s. So about half of those shares are already owned by the city of Thornton, okay? The city of Greeley owns shares, Fort Collins City owns shares. There's probably about 150 shares left in that company. It is already majority municipal owned, but the vast majority of that water is still being rented back to agriculture, even by Thornton and the cities. But it yields very well, and it's treatable where all the treatment plants are, so it could be a good supply
So
for
you
us.
can
And we don't need a lot of
divert
it.
way up at the head.
You have to do it by exchange, so, because their head gate is a little bit below Greeley's intake at the Bellevue plant and Soldier Canyons, but there's already been change cases in court, so there's already mechanisms to show how to do that, how to pay your return flow obligations, all those things that would be associated with changing that water rate.
So in this chart, I'm sorry,
No, go ahead.
when you have 600 shares, in fact, the 600 are not on the market.
No, that's just the total company ownership, like CBD, we're just saying, here's the total amount of shares, here's the cost per share. Yeah, today I don't know how many are left in that company. I know there's a lot of competition for those shares though. So you don't wanna wait 10 years to go out and say, oh, we finally need to go buy some whisk if we're gonna do it. Either by accepting it for dedication or going out and buying it on our own, we probably should start looking at it right now.
So they are available to be purchased now. About 100 shares, you said?
I think, you know, the last number I heard was 100 to 150 shares. Yeah, and we'll talk about all that a little bit more. So we got through that. It said focus on water acquisition before storage. That's sound because, you know, if you don't have the water to put in the bucket, why build a bucket? Begin accepting WISC for dedication, so there it goes again, bringing up that water supply and storage. Maybe we add to our ordinance that says we'll accept CBT, MPIC shares, or WISC shares for dedication. So if somebody does go out and acquire a WISC share, they can bring that to us and dedicate it.
Is that a CBT water, or is that?
Now, WISC is made up of, it has a native component, where they just divert water off of the Poudre priority, and it also has a trans-basin component as well.
Yeah, that's part of the Grand Ditch, right?
It's part of the Grand Ditch,
Yeah.
yeah. And there's also some trans-basin components up in the Rawas. So if you get up past Chambers Lake and go on the other side, they own some water up there too that they transfer. The Michigan Ditch and a few other ditches they actually. So there's a trans-basin component that's wholly consumable and then a native component. Keep pursuing those MPIC shares, North Poudre Irrigation Company shares in the beginning. Budget funds to acquire new water, the town's been doing a very good job of that. Budget funds for water conservation, we have a water conservation program. Initiate adding a future Northwell tap to the Windsor system, we just completed that process. That tap's now up there by County Road 74. Explore an agreement with Northwell to change the water supply and storage and replace those return flow obligations. I think if we ever actually acquired some water supply and storage companies, we would then initiate those discussions, probably with Northwell and probably Greeley too, just in case we had to move plants or something. Connect Greeley master meter to Windsor SCADA system, that was accomplished. Set up a communication protocol between departments to manage that quantity of water from all the different providers. That's something that we do. Jenna set up a protocol for that, and I routinely send data to Terry and Charwan so that we know what water we're taking from, where we are in terms of our agreements, and we're keeping a pretty close eye on that. Probably some strategies in the future that we can keep working on that to kind of get our costs down a little bit. And then continue carrying over our CBT water, and if we have any additional supplies left over from demands, we can rent that out to agriculture. So CBT allows you to carry over 20% of your ownership. So the town actually does that. Currently, the Tri-Districts manages that for us, so they're watching our total CBT supply, and they're always accounting for that we would carry over our 20%. So even if we did have, like, say next year, the snow stops falling, CBT doesn't yield, but that 50% quota, we still would have 20% sitting in the reservoir already, so you could get an equivalent of 70% the following year. So that's good practice, good drought protection for the town to maintain and continue as long as we can.
So carry over meaning to carry the quantity for the next.
Yeah, so
year.
20% of our 5,800 units, we would be able to carry over in the northern water system, whether it's sitting at Horsetooth, Grand Lake, Granby, somewhere, wherever they keep it, it's in the system, but we would have 20% of our water supply for next year. So say they give a 50% quota and that's all they issue, we would have 50% plus the 20% of our ownership sitting in the reservoir.
Oh, we automatically get an additional 20.
Yeah, well, it
Well-
might not equate to a 20% quota, but 20% of our water supply would be there. And some of our units are actually fixed quota units, so every year we get 70%. I think it's about 2,000 of our units are fixed quota, so we get a 70% quota on those units every single year. So that's all I have for master plan review.
Is our biggest concern, if we go to the Soldier Canyon people, Northwell and Fort Collins Loveland, and said, can you take care of us for the next 20 years?
That's strategy, so why don't we wait till we go into executive?
So are we having another presentation after this
Yeah,
presentation
and
as well?
Okay,
In the executive
And
session?
then rates after executive.
Yeah, so
Okay.
we're gonna do executive session first because it's all part of the strategy and water
Okay.
acquisition, and then we're gonna have the water rate discussion following that.
Because I think it might be just a good idea to, I mean, there's a lot of folks here in the room, and not all of us, I don't think, recognize or know who might be all here. So it might be a good idea just to go around the room and make introductions, get any final questions. If there aren't any, then we can break and move into that executive session. How does that sound? Okay, and why don't we start here?
I'm Ethan Harden. I'm with Stantec, a financial consultant. We'll be talking to you about your rates here, it sounds like in a couple minutes.
John Thornhill, Water Resource Manager.
Tom Jones, Windsor Town Board.
Jess Shubner, customer service.
Ken Bennett, Town Board.
Paul Rennemeyer, town board.
Mark Reagan, Piper Jaffrey. Milt Okanaga, Water and Sewer Board.
Greg Pulowski, Water and Sewer Board.
Janine Mueller, Water and Sewer.
Carlos Medina, Water Sewer Board. Ron Lay with Stantec Consulting.
Dean Moyer, Town of Windsor.
Eric Garner, JV Engineers, just an interested bystander.
Swagger, Director of Engineering.
Crystal Ecker, Town Clerk.
Shane Hale, Town Manager.
Ian McCarter, Town Attorney. David Zaslowski, Town Board.
Barry Wilson, Town Board.
And Christy Melendez, Mayor of Windsor. So with that, any additional questions for John?
Yeah.
Ken?
Regarding the purchasing of water, it's my understanding that you have to show a use for that water?
You have to show a beneficial use if you're taking water to court and changing it.
If you're changing
If
the
you're
use?
changing the use. So changing the location of delivery, changing the type of use. So if you're taking water off of a farm and putting it into a treatment plant and sending it to a town, that's a change of use.
And what's the time frame? Like, let's say we have a use for it, 5 years, 50 years?
Well, I mean, it probably takes you, you don't wanna just buy one share and
Right,
then
you
go
can't
change it to
speculate,
court.
right?
You're probably gonna spend a few years
Yeah.
acquiring.
I think he's asking like how far ahead?
How far ahead can we
Kinda asking,
purchase
like,
water?
Kind of grading Rome City's doctrine
Right.
and how
Yeah.
much.
And I know the
planning
intent
can
is that
be-
you can't speculate on water.
Especially
But-
on CBT.
Right, but
But ditch
beneficial
water,
use in what time
we
frame?
could buy it now and then, we could lease that back to farming for 15, 25 years if we wanted
Yeah.
to. If we don't need it, we could keep
Kinda
it in
the-
farming.
The
until
state
we
water
change it.
engineer has gotten a little bit more active in that, so I think that, so there's a doctrine called the Grading Grove Cities Doctrine. The idea that you acquire more water than you need, because they understand that you're gonna have residents, you need to have more than an exact number. But especially like on the district, water district over, out of Grand Junction, they've kind of taken a hard line on a couple municipalities that had too much water and had them curtail it, so I think 20 years, 25 is not a bad planning horizon,
Okay,
but you can't say, well, this is our 200-year growth
Yeah.
horizon, and
okay.
There's that municipal exemption that gives you more freedom. So, because Thornton owns enough water, they got enough till 2045 or some crazy year.
And it's still being put to beneficial use if it's going back to ag or something. I think if you just stop using it, that's gonna hurt you, because you're stopping the
You're just
historical
sitting on water,
use.
right?
You're actually gonna get less credit for it when you go to change it in court, because you're no longer using it.
I want to follow up on what Ken said though, because Dennis had made the comment that we couldn't say we want to go spend $10 million a year and buy all the CBT we can, overbid everybody, acquire as much as we can, because there's that time frame that we have to put it to use or something, I think is what you had
That's what I'm
said.
getting at,
Yeah,
yeah.
what he was getting at. So I don't know if that's what we've addressed so far in the conversation. Because what we were told is what if we, started, instead of doing some other sources, if we just said, let's go all CBT or nothing, et cetera, and started spending, like I said, 10 million a year, I'm just making up a number here. But, we said that that's where we're gonna go to get our cheapest source of water or whatever, and let's just bankroll it while it's still cheap, we know how to outbid, or, whatever. I mean, going down that road, I thought we were told though that there's a time frame at which you have to put that to use, otherwise they won't allow you to acquire it or something
I
like that.
believe we're talking about the cap.
yeah,
At Northern,
CBT and Northern, they curtail that. So from the town side, for a while, we were actually over that threshold, right? So, Northern specifically keeps you from like any kind of prospecting or anything, so, they do curtail the number of units you can get. For that source specifically, now if you went and just like, bought a big farm somewhere, that's kind of a different deal. Northern has additional, so I'm sure like, every other entity on the Northern Front Range would have also had that theory, and they would have had all these shares bought up years ago. So, Northern specifically, if you read our potable, water master plan, I think at that time, just a few years ago, we were already over our cap. And, the only way for us to get more CBT at that time is if a developer kind of came in and contributed those, the town wasn't allowed to buy them.
And what your answer to what Ken had asked earlier is in regards to that if we won X amount of acre feet shares of CBT and it's deeded as farm CBT or something like that, am I?
I was talking about.
They would then require the change of use because what was actually
let me clarify, CBT, you do not have to take to court, that's the beauty of it.
Okay.
It can go immediately to the plant. But they have a policy that caps you based on the amount of permitted lots, for example, it's called the cap count. And there's several methods, and it looks at how much native water you have, because remember, CBT is a supplemental source, so you have to have native water to even have CBT. And it looks at all the yields of your entire water supply compared to the amount of platted lots, for example, that you're planning on serving, and then it calcs, do you have enough water? And if, you know, for right now, we have a lot of platted lots and a lot of future growth coming. We're under the cap, so we can actually go out on the market, purchase CBT, acquire that water and take it in. Now, say that's the rest of the development we have, and we fill all those lots up, and we don't have any more on the horizon, when we go to do the cap count, we'll probably be over it, and we won't be able to buy any more CBT. But that's a northern policy. When you look at like Water Supply and Storage Company, for example, that is ag water. You have to change that use in court to be able to use it at the town. That, though, we could buy now and sit on it for 25, 50 years. As long as it was being put to beneficial use, whether it's ag or the town, it can just sit there.
But eventually, there's gonna be a court case
Now,
for a
once you
change of use
start-
case,
Change
which
of
would
use.
make your $20,000 per what it was
It'll go
up
up a
here,
little
it would go up, because you got, what, 4 or 5 years in probably a water
Yeah,
court
once you
case.
start your water court case, I think they're on track now, 2-year tracks. You gotta get that done in 2 years. Now, you might start with a substitute water supply plan, do 5 years there, kinda establish the use, and change how you're gonna pay your return flows and stuff, but once you get on a court track, it's gonna be about 2 years to change it.
So trying to stay away from strategy at this point, but I want to be clear, we could purchase WSSC water now, as long as it's remained in agriculture use, and we could sit on it for 5, 10, 20
Yep.
years. There's also ATM options,
Yep, ATM options, yep.
okay, okay. Not getting into
Yeah, I
strategy,
mean, we
just
could,
trying to clarify.
yeah, there's a lot of options,
But then there's that time frame built in order to be able to change the use,
Right.
which could
2
be up to
years.
5 years or something, is what
5
you're
years
saying,
is
2 to
We
5
can
years.
do it fairly quickly now. The good thing about that is, that's one of the ditch companies that has what we call a template to create, it's already been changed. Somebody's already shown the way,
Okay.
so it won't be us going alone for the first time, so.
It's establishing
It's
precedent.
it's already
What
got
you're talking about
established.
with
Yep.
Because Thornton did it, so.
Thornton did it, Greeley did it, Fort Collins did it,
Yeah.
Tri-Districts have actually done it, there's several cases on that West Farm.
John, I guess to go back to this, everything you presented here was the original kind of plan, based on full build out 102. Is there another presentation then where you're gonna say, okay, now we,
There is,
There is.
and then,
there's another presentation
Yeah.
in executive session. Cause it really gets into strategy,
I'm getting
so.
old, you know.
I'm just ready, I know the board is ready to go, I just really don't want to, advertise to, whatever the board wants to do, I think it's better to talk about that in executive session.
Greg, you had a question?
Yes, John, what happens to the CBT yield if there were to be a call in the river, compact call?
That's a great question.
Is there a projection of what kind of number we'd be looking at?
Well, the compact though goes to 22, so I would assume CBT units are pre-1922.
No, they're post.
No, they're
We
not.
would
Are
get
they?
called out.
Proposed. Wow.
Yeah, the compact's 1922 and the CBT system, wasn't even online till the 50s.
And then the rights don't predate that
I
though?
think the rights are 1930s.
30s.
Okay.
So yeah, we would have to curtail the amount that curtailment would entail. I think they came up with a plan though for the upper basin, so we might get you some more information on that in the future.
That's what I had asked in the literacy class, because
Mhm.
the lower basin, Powell's
Mhm.
gone, the hydro plant's gonna go dry.
Yeah.
So something will be done, and the deal was, well, we may have to change
I
the
believe-
CBT allocations.
I believe Arizona gets called out first and then it goes to the upper basin states.
Okay. Any final questions for this part of the presentation to date? Okay, seeing none, then I would seek a motion, Mr. McCarter, to move into an executive session.
Madam Mayor, I move that we move into executive session pursuant to Colorado Revised Statute 24-6, 402 subsection 4E and I for the purpose of determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategy for negotiations, and instructing negotiators with respect to water resources.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion on the floor from Mr. Rennemeyer with a second from Mr. Bennett to move into an executive session. All in favor state with aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we'll move into an executive session in just a couple minutes.
Yes, ma'am. So we're, Crystal's making sure that the cameras are getting turned off, so.
Okay.
talk about how we are going to pay for our water plan. And we have I'm taking an approach, a two-part approach. The first part being the O&M and the purchase of our treated water to resell to customers. The second, that part is fairly straightforward. The second part, the acquisition of the raw water, is a little bit more complicated, but we'll just step into it here. So what we have been doing was an annual rate increase to the users based on the cost increase from our suppliers. We do a weighted average because we don't buy the same amount of water from all of our suppliers. And if we do that every year, it could be an increase or a decrease. It's not often a decrease or stay even, but we usually don't see that big of an increase from the suppliers. But anyway, I think what I want to say here is, no, I think we do that every year and we continue to do it, no matter what we do on the raw water portion of it. Because I think it's important that we keep caught up on the cost from our suppliers. So I'm gonna suggest we keep doing that, no matter what we do with the raw water portion.
And so you're just saying that the annual 5% increase just to keep up with?
Yes, yes.
I'm sorry, what about it?
The bids of the county is normally done, and a 5% increase every year to just kind of keep up with costs.
Yeah.
I thought you just said it could go up or down.
Well, we'll talk about it. It's been on the next page here. Oops, I went too far. It could go up or down. It's historically been around 5%.
Okay.
But you can see here, we're looking at Northwell +3, Greeley +4, and Fort Collins Loveland 3.1. So the weighted average of that is 3.29%. So what I'm suggesting is, regardless of what we do with the raw water or NISP or anything else, I think we do a resolution in December and increase the cost per 1,000 gallons to the customer by 3.29%. That'll keep us up with our cost from our suppliers. So again, I think we keep doing that no matter what we do raw water wise. So then, to address acquisition of raw water, as John mentioned in his presentation, the way we handle it now is we require a developer or a builder to bring us 50% in actual water shares and payment in lieu of 50%, and the cash price determined by the market conditions. So I think, and John and Jess and I and these two gentlemen spent a lot of time talking about this. I think where it stands now, NISP does not have an official record of decision. So until that happens, the project's not a guaranteed go. I think it's very close to going, so we have to plan for it, which we're doing here. But our recommendation was that we keep doing this 50-50 cash in lieu and dedication until we hear that NISP is actually a go with a record of decision. That should be, Northern Water told us it should be in early 2019. The comment period is over for that project, but we still have to wait for the official record. They said early 2019, right? Well, they said 2019.
The Corps just says 2019.
Yeah.
Hey, in 2009, they said 2015. So
Right.
Just so you know.
Can I ask a crazy question?
What's up?
Our recent election and its results in Colorado, with the governor that we will now be having, et cetera, that couldn't at all derail NISP, could it, at this stage in the game, or could it, or?
I think it's in the hands of the Corps of Engineers, right?
Yeah, and I would say that too, you know, we do have a Colorado water plan that's supported by all levels of government. Storage is a part of that plan, and this was one of the identified projects that should be funded and should be completed as part of the plan, so I think there's a lot of support for this with our government.
I haven't heard any public conversation specifically about it, I just was curious if a House and Senate in Colorado and the governor or whatever, if there couldn't be a change of direction on.
I know one of the new Larimer County Commissioners spoke out against it, but I can't say how he would, if it's maybe beyond county commissioners at this point, I'm not sure. So that probably doesn't matter too much either.
Yeah, the comment, like I mentioned, the comment period is closed. And they, at Northern, they said Fort Collins wrote something, the Save the Pooter people wrote something. I don't know what it is, I think you can see it online, that this program has its own website. Do they have the comments on there, John?
They're not on there yet, but they'll get posted once the Corps.
Is it the Corps that we're waiting, is it
The
the Corps
Corps
that?
will respond to the latest round of public comments and then issue a record of decision.
The comment period may be closed, but I'm afraid the litigation period continues, so there's no door on that. But I think somewhere I've heard that there's expedited treatment if in fact someone sues to try to resolve the litigation within a year.
And I believe they can only challenge the process now at this point. They can't really challenge the analysis and stuff of the actual project and the purpose and need.
Well, Windy Gap's got its permit, but it's in litigation, so.
To be continued, unfortunately.
Right.
Darn lawyers.
So, to stay on the subject of dedication or cash in lieu, I think we keep going until that happens, till we get the record of decision, and then we switch to 100% cash in lieu. The reasoning behind that is, the way we do it now is we have to go out and buy some shares of CBT. When this project is going, if we go to 100% cash in lieu, we will be providing the shares of NISP water, so we don't have to go out and buy it anymore on the open market. So if this happens, I think we should do that, we should switch to 100% cash in lieu.
In this time, we maybe blended a little bit. I mean, I don't think we're saying April 2019, we get a record of decision, we switch right then. I just think it's gonna set us on the path where, you know, maybe we're in kind of a 12 to 18-month window to making that transition over between what we're doing, acquiring raw water, and when we're ready to go to the cash in lieu. So it'll be blended a little bit, but certainly a record of decision would be a big feather in our cap to make that switch.
Okay, so now moving into the part about raw water. This first slide says, is what have we done? We hired these gentlemen, and Jess was kind enough to dig through a lot of our utility building records we went back to 2014. We looked at our usage records, our billing records. We looked at planning statistics and projections about how many homes we think we're gonna get, that kind of thing, and we started to form a plan as how to pay for this. And we pitched that to you back in April of this year, of 2018. At that point, we had a 10% annual increase and an addition of $15,000 water resource fee. Now, that report was based on information up to April 2017. So, as I mentioned, we had a lot that has taken place since April of 2017, by almost, in the neighborhood of 1,000 new homes and a lot new residents. So what we did is we did that same digging, or I should say Jess did the same digging, and thank you for that, by the way. And we got the information up until September of this year. So the information that we based these these scenarios on was based on information from 2014 up until September of 2018. So it was quite a bit of work and information. And since we've also met several times with engineering, myself, consultants and customer service and communications last week, we tortured Kim to sit through one of our brainstorming meetings, and she sat in on that. So we've been working together on it for quite some time now. So what we found out of all of that is to pull off a project that is now 99 or $100 million to us, we need to add a new revenue stream or increase one that we have, or both. The thing that I need from you tonight here is some direction on how we want to split up the costs. In our discussions in various brainstorming sessions, we discovered that we can pretty much make whoever you want to pay for this project pay for it. And what I mean by that is completely on monthly rate payers, completely on the developers, or a mixture of both. Now, when we first started doing this, we tried to keep it on the backs of the rate payers, and that quickly went south because we were getting into 20-25% annual rate increases. So we kind of didn't pursue that too much. What we have here tonight in a few slides is we have a scenario of how we do it now, and if we do not do the NISP project or raw water, we have a second scenario where the cost would be borne entirely on new development. So as you'll see, it makes our cash and lieu fee go up pretty high. And the third scenario is a split between that, is much like the one we had here in April, where some of the cost is borne by the ratepayers and some by the new construction. We'll get to that here in a little bit. So, I guess we got here faster than I thought, but the scenario I talked about was if we put it all on development, that raw water fee would go up to $26,000. But what we would do is we would not charge our existing cash and lieu fee. That would just be the one water acquisition fee. We would still keep in place our regular tap fee. What we would do with that would be that would help fund our treatment plant, the regional treatment plant, when we get to that point.
Remind me what the tap fee is right now?
It is
$5,781.
How much?
$5,781.
And do we have that set up where it increases every year, or that it comes back before us every year? Or there's an actual increase every year of a certain percentage?
Dennis, is it an actual percentage, or does it come back every year?
It has to come back for.
But we look at it every year and okay,
From a modeling standpoint, you have a 3% increase on that one.
okay.
And what are you assuming the rate of construction?
It's a little higher than that, 4%.
4% per year?
How many,
We're under the CCI.
how many homes did that turn out to be? 400, I think. Homes,
440
440,
in the model?
yeah.
440.
Is that what, that's what we settled on?
For the first year of growth,
Yeah,
No, that was
I think it's in the
565.
565. We've got that for the first 2 years, and then we're dropping to
332.
332 for years 3 through 10.
That's about 4,100 units over 11 years.
That's a reduction from what we put in front of you the last time we were here in April, of about 500 units.
Yeah, 400.
Can you just clarify for me that first bullet point again? I think what you're saying, this is a new fee. that we currently don't charge the raw water?
We do, but we currently charge, what, 7,400, John? Or the raw water fee?
And that's the 50%.
That's the 50%. Plus
That's
this would
the
be
cash in lieu.
the 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, so instead of the 100% being 15,000, plus or minus would be 26,000 is what this would be.
Yeah.
So it'd be an
What-
increase of 9,000.
What we charge now is we charge the regular tap fee, and we charge a cash in lieu fee, and they have to bring half of their
Right.
raw water. If we do this, it'll just be the regular tap fee and $26,000, and they don't have to bring us any water.
Right.
Like I said, it's a big jump, but it's a big project.
Yeah, so they paid the 26 plus this 5781, so it's like over 30.
Yeah.
And right now, they're paying 15.
That's not completely out of line, to your neighboring communities either.
And they're paying 20 now.
Yeah, they're paying 20. It'd be an increase of about 9,000 there.
Huh?
It'd be an increase of about 9,000
For who?
for a developer under the 26,000.
Per new home, right?
It
Yeah.
goes from 15,000 to 26. Right?
Right,
That's 11?
I'm sorry. That's 11.
Okay.
I apologize.
That's slow down construction.
So the other scenario we put together is that next bullet point where we assign some of the cost to the ratepayers. 75% to the developers, 25% to the ratepayers. You can see there, that would make that, instead of 26,000, that number would be 15,000. But it would also include a 10.5% annual increase to the ratepayers. So that one, like I said, is similar to what we were talking about last April.
Can I pull up their slides?
Yeah, I think I'm about
So
done.
we're taking 11,000 down, 15,250. Increase for them.
Yeah. What is our current water rate? Water ratepayer rate?
We'll
Oh,
get into that here in a minute.
We have
We'll some numbers.
We have a tiered system.
So to 3/4 of 11,000 would be an $8,250 increase per home.
Okay,
But
so.
that 10.5 is also in addition to the 3.9, so it'd be
No,
13.8.
Actually, Paul, actually that includes the annual
Does
increase.
it? Okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
That 10.5 we're talking about would include the annual 5% from our suppliers.
Okay.
And it could be less than 5, you know, like you did, like for this
Yeah,
year.
it's 3 something.
Well, just as I look at the slide, it says in addition to the annual rate increases from our suppliers.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So that's all right. Just-
I forgot to strike that.
Okay.
I
No, that's good,
apologize.
you got it.
No, the 10.5 would include it, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
That's a big difference, thanks.
Per Dean, yeah.
I have an initial to change.
In addition.
Okay, so, did you want to say anything?
No.
Okay.
Just real quick, I'm Ron Lagan, this is Ethan Harden. The staff has been great, I just want to say that, to work with. Getting us out all the information, we need. Thank you, Jess. What we're trying to do here is get more specific with you on these options. So we've got a slide for each one of the options or scenarios that we're talking about, and I'm gonna have Ethan run through those with you. Feel free to ask questions at any time, and I think that's just about it, so. go
Yep,
for it.
so, as Ron mentioned, we have 3 scenarios for Unite. They're kind of broad strokes about how we can tackle this problem, and then we'll probably refine them afterwards. But we're looking for you for policy guidance and direction on how to proceed. So the first scenario we have here is basically the 5% rate track and an increase of 5% every year. And then we are not including any NISP projects. And the one difference is we are still buying raw water shares on the market, and so we've accounted for that within this scenario. But other than that, we don't have any other raw water supply projects that are coming into play. So you can see in our operating fund, we build up a large balance because most of those projects are going away. And then on the right, because there's multiple funds within the utility, we have extra cash. And you can see from 27 to 28 is one of our bigger drops where we pay for that water treatment plant in 2028.
Note in the operating fund cash balance is, you know, we look at the operating fund separate from your impact fee fund and other funding sources, that the cash is about the same at the beginning of the period as it is at the end of the period. So it's not like we're, you know, creating these big, huge reserves that we never had. And there are projects that we know about that are coming down the pike, that, you know, aren't on the CIP just yet. So we've only got the next 10-year CIP. There's projects coming in 11, 12, 13, 14, right around the corner. So it'll be operations funding. The operations funds also pays for your R&R activity. So if you have increased R&R activity over the years to come, you know, as you age, of course, it's gonna get more costly. So then you can have more dollars up on the front end and a more systematic approach to your renewal and your replacement programs, and maybe be a little more proactive than reactive. If that's the case, I don't know what your policies or programs are now on your R&R program, so.
I'm sorry, so what again causes the drop in the operating fund from 17 to 23, and then what causes it to spike?
Projects.
I'm sorry?
It'll be projects, most likely.
There's
You
an
wanna
increase
specific
in
projects?
going in.
Yeah.
We have specific projects already in the,
Yeah, so, to name a few, we're doing a water transmission line to connect with Northwell County. There's water line oversizing on the Poudre Heights 3rd
okay.
PH.
Just wanna-
There's a list, yeah, we can provide that if you'd like.
Yeah, that one's all from our capital plan,
Yep.
right?
Yep. And so that capital plan runs through 2023, and then we've projected just an unspecified amount based on an average usage in 2024 and beyond.
To about 2.3 million a year as spend goes. And that can happen levelized, or it can be $1 million, 4 million on a bigger project. Several different ways you can use that.
So this was the current state as is what we were trying to show, without any sort of raw water projects, so.
Supportive of Dean's comments earlier, you know, this is capturing the water rate increases that we included in the modeling for your 3 providers. We also have a CPI and in some cases growth escalation on certain accounts within the operating fund as well, salaries and benefits, et cetera. Standard 3% CPI. Plus, we've included growth in those accounts as well, because you're gonna need additional staff as you increase your base and your customer account level. So if we wanna maintain the same level of service.
On the slide at the top,
Yep.
You've got fee per acre feet,
Yes.
54,000?
Yes, so what we're doing there is, so we have these on each one of the slides and kind of giving you a background of what is exactly going on. And so what we're saying here is we're taking the 7,457, which is half of one share, so I'm multiplying it by 2, so that gives us around 15,000, divided by 0.29 to equal our fee per acre foot. And so you're gonna see that, like I mentioned, in every single one of them, so we can see what that actual cost is per acre feet.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Alright, so I'm gonna move to the next scenario, and this one is where our annual rate increase covers our annual operating and maintenance increases. So you'll see that the annual rate increase is not gonna be steady, and that is because there's different rate increases that happen every year. So you can see a big jump in 2019. That has to do a lot with, I think, both O&M, about 150,000 in O&M increases and about 450,000 in salary increases. And so that's bringing on new folks within the town to help, as Ron mentioned, have these services and maintain the same level of service. So that's all that our rate increases are doing, is covering our increase in O&M costs only.
What do we do, what's in 2026?
Yeah, so in 2026,
The NISP operating costs come on
Yep.
board in that year, so
Okay.
it's a pretty significant amount
Yep,
relative to the
exactly.
budget, so.
You got that. So, from there, we're saying in the second piece of this scenario is where we've decided that the developers will pay for 100% of the NISP projects. And so what happens in this scenario is we have, as Dean was mentioning, the extra fee that will then be able to pay for these projects that goes into its own special fund. And so we're paying cash for these projects as well as issuing debt and paying for that debt from that fund. So all of the money that is coming from developers is going either to cash payments or to debt payments in order to fund the projects. So that's why we're issuing $30 million of debt throughout the plan period. We understand that that's probably not the way that it would work, but we can change that when we refine it further, but that's how our model is set up to work just every year at the beginning. So at that point, you can see we're much closer to our target, which is this blue line in the operating fund. And again, the total cash balance there, we can see it building up, and then we pay for that water treatment plant in 2027, and we lose or a decrease in cash to 2028.
There's some things you can do to correct that later on, years 5 through 10. You could go higher than what we're showing here in this plan. If you go back just one slide, take a look at the cumulative. We're not far off of the cumulative, a little higher on the cumulative in the second plan, but it is covering our costs, so to speak, on the operation side. So, but we are diminishing cash in this plan as well. So each one's gonna behave and act a little differently. And again, we're just trying to give you options now that you might consider.
And you'll notice the 26,000 there, which Dina mentioned as well, is that would be the fee that would have to be, it would have to be that high in order for the developers to pay for 100% of those projects.
I guess and the rate increase on this one, the prior slide was 5%,
Yep.
which was the supplier cost increase pass-through. If the ratepayers are not bearing any of the costs on this at zero, again, I didn't quite understand why the
Yeah.
rates fluctuate.
Yeah, so I'm gonna go back to this other one, and we can see the cumulative of about 54% in the previous one, and this one just fluctuates because we're tracking with our change in O&M costs. So as those change each year, we're taking that actual dollar amount and applying it to our rates in order to determine what that percentage needs to be to cover our O&M increases each year. So you'll see at the end in the cumulative, we're at 55, which is very similar to that 5% rate track,
Right.
but it fluctuates as we fluctuate when our
And here, just
expenses
to
rise.
go back up, in 19, we were adding a pretty significant portion of salaries,
Yep.
new staff for things that we need, that they talked to you about. And then here, we bring online the NISP operating costs that run through the operations fund. Everything's on the capital side prior to that, and now we're bringing that in. So that's why you got two high values here. The other stuff's pretty normalized for the most part. I'm not sure about the reduction in 20. There's something going on in 20 where I think there was a cost in the 19 estimate
and we
that
did
is
that.
coming off the schedule, is about 80
Yeah.
to 100,000 if I remember. So that's why that percentage is a little lower in that year, going from one year to the next.
So built into this, you have NISP in there as well as the treatment plant.
Yes.
And what are you using for the costs on this? The treatment plant, I think it shows 30 million.
The treatment plant, we are planning to pay with our regular tap fee. We don't have the
And you can see
treatment
we've,
plant.
the
That
treatment plant is
also-
$25 million, I think is what you're asking.
Well, you had commented, I think, that in 2028, the drop is because of the treatment plant.
Yep, so it's a total of $25 million through what we've talked about with your staff is that is probably not gonna happen in 1 year, so we're taking 10% of that cost in 2026, 60% of that cost of $15 million in 2027, and then 30% of that cost of $7.5 million in 2028. So you'll see in 2027, we use that cash, so then at the beginning of 28, we have less cash, then that's the 15 million drop.
Another explainable increase for, jumping up to the 6.2 there in 2028 is because I just did a back of the napkin calc for, operating the treatment plant. Said there's gonna be X number of operators, and I think we put in about
430,000?
440,000 in there for operations, so.
Any other questions on this one? We were really trying to separate what ratepayers should be paying for in O&M and what developers should be paying for, and we try to marry the two in this one, so. Alright, so the last one that we have for you tonight is where developers are gonna pay for 75% of the water project, raw water projects, and it's gonna be a burden of 25% on the ratepayers. So we can see here that the rate is much higher. at 10.5%, and the reason for that is that in order for the ratepayers to be able to pay that amount, we need to raise the rates in order to have cash in our hands for those projects to be paid. So we can do it as we just saw with lower rate increases, but that assumed a 0% of the projects being paid by our ratepayers. So in order to, if we want to say that they need to pay X percent, we would have to be ready for some sort of increase from them to receive cash in order to pay for it. And Ron, do you have anything else on this one?
Debt changes in all these scenarios.
Yeah.
One of the challenges we have is the project happening right now. And so we're gonna issue debt or pay cash for that project. If we issue debt, we have debt service coverage requirements that require rate increases. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg issue, right? So if we're trying to find this happy balance here where neither one of those issues become too prevailing, so that it's not too ratepayer based or too developer based. The $26,000 fee, backing up a slide, I have just my gut instinct tells me as folks start looking at this, your neighbors, the other participants, you're gonna see similar changes to their costs as well and their fees, if that makes sense. It's just happening right now, and when the cash calls are coming, that's when, it's gonna be like, okay, how are we gonna do this, really? How are we gonna do this, We've had an increase in this project, just since we came last April from 85 million to 95 million, about a $9 million increase in about a 7-month period.
With this model, 25% to the ratepayers increase 10.5% a year. What happens in 2029 and 30 and 31? Or thereafter?
Great question.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Two things I think can happen. We could potentially do a rate reduction, literally, after we've cash funded the project in that turmoil period. We could also probably reduce that connection fee at that time. It's really just a temporary cash need and a balancing for debt service coverage issues.
So, I have a question. The 26,000 on the previous slide to the developers,
Yeah.
that was an increase from 15 of 11,000. So is the 15,000 on the third scenario, is that staying where they're at now?
Pretty close. When they're not having to bring a dedicated amount, because we just double that up, it's about 15,000 today, so.
So then it seems more to me like the third scenario is more like 100% on the ratepayers than if the developers are paying about the same amount. That makes sense.
It's a bit different. So the raw water fee there of $15,000, and we're bringing that in, and then there's also
Say that again.
so although the fee is $9,000 different, and so that happens in 2020 when we go to 100% cash in lieu, assuming we have a record of decision for NISP. So when we're pulling in what is that, $11,000 less, there's less money for the developers to be paying the full amount of that. So the difference that we see and we can make up with that is the extra part of the rate increases where our ratepayers are paying 25%.
Well, and let me just say, we just wanted to put up a couple scenarios so the board understands what's our current condition, what does 100% development pay in its own way look like. We kind of picked the 75-25 for illustrative purposes, and it ended up being about what developers are paying now. But these are just so the board can understand, okay, if we increase to the ratepayers, what happens on the development side? If we increase on the development side, what happens to the ratepayers? So again, this is in no way a recommendation. This is just supposed to be, give you guys a couple scenarios so you can see what happens with what decision.
And just to follow up, we talked about that and potentially bringing other policy level questions to you or other approaches to deal with this later on, but not quite prepared for that tonight.
Can we get copies of all of these
Of course, yes.
PowerPoints that we've seen? I'd like actual hard copies, especially when we've got diagrams like this that are comparison, and it's much easier to have them in, like right here to in front of you, instead of going slide by slide.
We were working on that today, so that's why you don't have them,
That's
so.
okay.
Yeah.
But there's been a couple of other PowerPoints too we've seen that I think we should have.
Oh,
All
like
the
John's
basic
earlier.
possible, because I need to digest this.
Yeah.
This just doesn't seem like 75-25 to me,
Doesn't
the
seem-
developers. Seems almost flipped to me.
You think,
So
can
what
you
do you-
explain the debt to cash
As far-
a little bit more, cause that's what's really changing those numbers.
Yeah, so a portion of that 10.5% is some of the bonds being issued, and we have to then cover our debt service coverage in order to make that, make sure our bonds don't get callable by our entities that are issuing bonds. So in order to make that happen, a debt service coverage happens through the revenue fund, where we bring in revenue, our operating expenses come out, we take out all of our impact fees, so all these millions of dollars that we're bringing in, they do not get to be counted towards our debt service coverage. So as we issue more debt, that coverage needs to be higher, so we need to we need to raise our rates in order to meet that coverage.
So what they wanna see typically, to make sense, right? If any bank was to loan us money, they wanna see that your net, after you pay all the bills, is about the debt amount each year plus another 20 to 25%. So that's that 1.2 to 1.25 DSC coverage amount. It's typical, I don't think there's any way around that. So, anyway.
Remind me of the scenarios again, 1, 2, one is developer pays all, okay?
No,
One is
one is how we are
Right
going now.
50/50.
Yeah, and it's not very realistic because we still need a raw water supply project. So the second one is where I'll scoot back, where we have our rates just cover our own increases, and we're putting 100% of that raw water project burden on developers. And so that's an increase in the fee, which we don't see on that last slide. But what I've tried to show is the average bill and what that looks like.
And your cash funding 70% of the project,
Clearly stands out.
Yeah.
correct?
Yes, we are. So all the debt that's being issued is related to the raw water supply projects. So of the 100 million, we're debt funding 30% of that. And then the last one is the developers pay for 75. And
It's more.
there was a disconnect, I think, in what we were showing, but there is debt being issued in this one, but again, it's being paid only by those impact fee funds from the developer, and it's covered within that $15,000 fee.
We'll get Jess another slide to replace this one, because it should show that in this slide. I think it was just a timing thing
Yeah.
today.
And we were showing-
This was our first iteration, and then we talked with the staff and reran another one, I just don't think we got this updated, so. Apologize for that.
So, yeah, lastly, we just wanted to show the rate tracks and what those looked like, especially with the fluctuations, because I think those can be misleading. So, obviously the orange one is the fluctuations, and we end up generally about a cumulative rate increase of just over 60% in 11 years.
Remember the cumulatives were close, that's why those lines are really mirroring each other right here, you know? And then the other third approach is rates go up.
So again, we can get these to you, but one of the things that we need from you all is how do we want to proceed? Who should take the burden of this project? Is it going to be split? As Dean mentioned before, is it 100% one side, 100% or the other? That's probably not the case, and it's going to be a mix of both. But right now, what we're having trouble with in our financial plans is that there's so many different things that can change, and until we get direction from you all, we can't really decide or move in a direction to sharpen the pencil, so to speak, because there, like I mentioned, there's just so many ways that we could go. So we're looking for you for direction of how to proceed.
One of those things that we'll talk to you about, and we did last time, I think, I'm trying to remember who all was here the last time around, I know you were.
I think everybody.
Everybody was here.
Was here.
Yeah.
We're missing one of our board members, but other than that, we all were here.
Okay. Yeah, one of the things we'll talk about is the impacts of growth and a reduction in growth levels.
Right.
Right. So just,
I mean, so you basically need to know if we want developer only or more of a developer ratepayer
mix.
mix.
And also the cash and lieu policy that you're in favor of, you know, once we have determined this is coming online, that we go to cash only. Now, the quicker we do that, the better off we're gonna be. Every year that goes by that we're only collecting the 7,000 plus additional water rights is a lost opportunity to start to fund the project. So what can happen is the longer we wait to do that, Right now, we have it wired to start effective fiscal year 2019, January 1, right? Is that correct?
2020.
2020, sorry. So, anything beyond that, we'll just increase that fee beyond that, if that makes sense. So timing is important, the cash and lieu policy is important. What else am I missing, John? There's several
How much
options.
you want that debt fund versus cash fund, I guess.
Debt versus cash,
That'll change the numbers a lot.
there's some debt financing options that I've put on the table that we might bring back to you, some programs that could really help us under the circumstances. Defer principal and interest payments for, up to 5 years and, kick some of that down the road till we get more of our base established. We've got, opportunities to talk to the development community and say, well, it's cheaper if you pay us now for your share, 15,000 versus 26,000. So do you wanna pre-subscribe today for us so we can put that in the bank and so,
Yeah,
part of
but
that
I think that's a legitimate, approach. I think actually the development community could be open to that, to just have guaranteed capacity and pay upfront.
this is something I've done in a past life of mine and it worked pretty well.
That's not gonna be enough to cover our costs, 15,000. Hey, now, the advantage is we have some cash to work with.
And they're taking some of the risks that way too.
Doesn't get us to where we need to be, does it?
Well, you guys have talked about debt service coverage, et cetera. Is the debt only related to bond and the treatment plant?
So every debt issuance that you'll see in any of these scenarios that we'll give you is only related to those raw water supply projects, NISP or any other ones that.
Okay, so it isn't just the treatment plant?
No.
You're imagining
So
that
we
we're
are
going to
cash
use-
funding the treatment plant through the water plant investment fee that Dean had mentioned in conjunction with the 15,000 cash in lieu, if that was the number.
Okay.
So
So then the debt is only related to NIF.
100%.
Now, if in fact Northern Water debt finances the whole project,
Mm-hmm.
and then just goes back to the members and says, okay, your total share,
Mhm.
your total payment to us is X, which includes debt service, then they bear the debt service coverage.
Yeah, but we would have to opt into that. I think our options with NISP, but the discussions we've had is, they're gonna look to see if they can just issue debt on the whole thing, but they also realize that every entity has its own options. And so I think even in that scenario, we could say, okay, Northern, we understand, we're gonna bring 20 million on the first day, and, we only need this much debt capacity. So I don't think Northern will dictate that to anybody. I think every community's gonna have its option of how it wants to do it.
I think also that the DSC would flow to you as a participant of that debt. I don't see Northern Water taking on the DSC coverage requirement.
It'd be hidden in the rate, I mean, hidden, it probably would list out, you owe us this
That's right.
for CapEx, this for debt service coverage, and then here's your number.
There's other options to talk about as well down the road, is if we don't want to cash fund that water treatment plant and instead use some of that cash to help pay for this raw water project and then flip the debt, so we are debt funding that raw water, or the water treatment plant. Those are options available as well. Like I mentioned before, there's a lot of
Marguerite.
varying things that can happen that will have a demonstrative effect on what the actual rate
I'll
is.
just tease you a little bit with some of the stuff we've talked about right now. We won't get into the weeds, but another concept is intra-fund loans. So we've got this PIF that's growing, that $5,000 fee. We're planning on cash funding that project when it happens. Like Ethan said, over a 3-year period, there's potential, that we may not need that plant at that time. So we could use some of those funds and pay back, or even debt finance that plant later on when we have more numbers to support that debt. And you
So
see-
we're not restricted? Some of these dollars are flexible depending on the need at the time?
Well, no, I think we would need to pay ourselves back. I think it needs to be by board resolution. We'd have to say we are borrowing $20 million from this fund to this fund. We're gonna pay it back. These are gonna be annual payments at this interest rate. It would need to be very public and, but I think we could borrow from ourselves, intra-fund. You just have to pay yourself back with interest and do it very publicly. So we couldn't just say, no, now we wanna spend it over here and just do it. But I think an inter-fund loan we could do.
And that can help some of those peak periods where you're seeing the higher rate increases necessary for just the ops portion. You can maybe, supplement some of those years, some of the impact on the NISP project, et cetera. So
what we're getting at is, once we choose a direction, there's so many other levers that we can pull to make these rate tracks more attractive to actual implementation, that we just need to take that first step, and then we can kind of move from there and flesh out these options with staff.
And the next thing we'll do is we'll tell you what the impacts of changes in the growth rate are on those scenarios, once we get to that point.
Yep.
It was pretty alarming last time for you folks who were here, so I mean, if we drop to a 75% growth rate from what we think today, it's extremely impactful. So there's a lot of risk here, is what I'm getting at.
It's scenario one page.
Again, there's no raw water projects other than just buying shares off the market.
This is what we're doing right now.
Right.
Okay. So I looked at Fort Collins Loveland Water District, it's my water district, and they just did a study, they have a 12-year plan out there. In their mapping, they have 4% across the board, but they're NISP, and the way they're trying to fund their projects is they have, over a 12-year period, like almost $150 million in mill levies, which I assume would have to be passed by their constituents, so they can't really guarantee that. There's multiple mill levies too, which means they'd have to go to the voters many times, so that was kind of odd. But, so that's just the way, so I think when we look at the 5%, you know, we will see some of our neighbors, like you guys said, doing something similar.
So really, in that case, the ratepayers are paying for NISP.
Well, I think they were looking to do a mill levy probably for NIS, but it wasn't real clear.
Everybody.
Yeah, which would be everybody, I guess, yeah, mill levy, yeah, so if they could get it passed, otherwise, you know, that's their plan, their 4% would be contingent on that.
Well, I think it does have to be both. I mean, it's gotta involve the developer and the current ratepayer. It's like anything else. It's like when you build a new school, even if you don't have a student that is gonna be entering that school, everybody has to pay into the new school.
Greater good of all
It's,
concerned.
yeah.
Looking at both sides, you could argue that those of us over here, like you said one time, the water's not gonna, I'm gonna turn my tap, I'm still gonna have water coming out.
Right.
So why should I pay for new people? But I come back, I've been looking at a comprehensive plan. And overwhelmingly, a lot of people in town said we want more restaurants, we want more businesses, we want more jobs, we want more, I mean, it's a comprehensive community. So philosophically, I'm kind of in line, I am in line with splitting it. I wanna look at the numbers, it seems like, I'm listening to what Barry said, it seems like a proportional amount hitting the residents.
Yeah, it seemed like
Yeah,
the
so I'm gonna
developers
look- I'm
stayed
gonna look
around
at
the
it a little more
same.
closely.
It seemed like the developer's costs stayed about the same, but we're seeing double-digit growth in rates.
Yeah.
So
But
I guess
I
we
am
need
in
to
favor
flush
of-
that
I
out.
am
I
in
like the
favor of
idea of paying
splitting it.
cash for projects.
Yeah.
I get that we need to front load it with some
Yeah.
cash. But at the end of the day, that third scenario didn't add up for me. And then if we are splitting it up, so it doesn't have to be 75-25 either, it could be 80-20 or 85-15, or, I mean, it could be another.
Right.
And that's why you should
David,
take
get
water,
out
why
is put the point we used to that for illustrative
Yeah.
purposes, so the
Right.
board can see.
It
We
sounds
want to
good.
pick a big enough number to where you can see the divergence there,
Mhm.
but yeah, it could be any
90-10,
percentage in
yeah.
there. It could be anything
Right.
in there.
Right.
Well, the other thing that's happening in three, if I understand it correctly, is the raw water fee that the developer pays is flat.
Yeah.
It's 15,000 every year, meanwhile, the ratepayers, I guess.
It'll
It
increase,
wasn't
it's got an
26.
escalation on
It
it,
does.
beyond year one, yeah.
Oh, it does?
Yeah.
Okay, so
What-
that's your one?
All of these do, yes.
3%.
Yep.
Is right now.
So
Okay.
2028 would be.
17,000.
You ought to figure it out, but
19,000.
more.
Oh, so-
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which still relatively makes sense, just
Right.
costs
Ratepayers
go
go
up.
up by 125%,
I don't know what the rest of your.
and then developers went up.
Elasticity of demand, is something I would like to talk about, and that is, you know, we can look, another consideration in your decision process is there's a point in time where we might lose development because of the fee too.
Right.
So I can't answer that question,
Right.
what that number is for them right now. I think to my point earlier, when we did comparatives last year, that fee of 15,000 plus the PIF was in line with what folks are charging around you now.
The scary,
We go too far behind, above that, there's a point where, the margins just may not be there.
right, the scary thing is if we take on the debt, development slows down for whatever reasons, we still have a debt payment to
You're
make.
gonna have the debt payment,
Right.
and it's all gonna be the ratepayers.
Right.
That happens, right?
And it's those of us here right now.
And so if we get to that point and we decide that it should be split whatever percent, or we can figure out what maybe is the most optimal percent as well, we can start looking at that debt amount. And that debt amount will change as that addition, this $15,000, and if it increases, we'll use less debt. If it stays low, we'll have to use more debt. It's just how do we get those revenue sources to come
And
in?
then the problem with that is what I was saying before, is the more debt we issue, the higher the debt service coverage requirement, which can then lead to higher than what we expected rates
Yep.
to cover that.
So if we generally like, in theory, this scenario, okay, maybe we don't like exactly the numbers, but we like this
The
scenario.
concept, right.
What else do you need to know from us to continue to move forward? So if we kind of say, well, we want a split, and we like this scenario, but we wanna see maybe the numbers flushed out a little bit differently. What else do you need to hear from us tonight?
Ethan, do you have quick access to our last comps that we made last year? Is that something you can pull up? Yeah. I'd like to take a look at that real quick with you, just because I wanna see what we found last year.
Okay.
Cause I think that'll, at least at the basic level, give us a litmus test for, what the development community would be.
And this is important, so I'm not trying to hurry it along, but I just wanna make sure that we are getting at least, because I don't think this is it, and so it's not like we're gonna go around the table and say yes or no. We just wanna move it in a direction and make sure everybody's got questions answered, and so that we can keep flushing this out. Because I imagine if that's scheduled for 2019, that would mean January 2019. And we're already gonna be behind, because I don't know that we're gonna be prepared to do anything in January at this point, or are we?
Well, I don't think so, Mayor. I don't think in this conversation, and that's why it's kind of back and forth, you get some direction back, and it's like,
Are we gonna do the standard
Yeah,
five,
I
right?
was gonna do,
You are gonna, I think everybody's on board for that, that's something we know,
Standard thing,
but we're
yeah.
still gonna be behind some percentage amount, no matter, or some dollar amount, no matter what
And we
direction.
can calculate a mid-year increase, we do that all the time.
Okay.
And we can do it in
Yeah.
third quarter or fourth quarter. It gets a little more involved for us, because then we really need to look at demands month by month, because we can't, it's not just an annual revenue stream that we're looking at now, we're looking at it secularly. So we have to really analyze the use data a little more to do that, but we can do it.
And we need time to work with all of our constituents too, residents, developers,
Yeah. So he's gonna pull up what we did last year as far as comparatives on the fees.
Before you go,
Yeah.
I guess one thing I'd be curious how hard it would be, and I think this is gonna take a little bit of just almost trial and error, but right now, what you said is the raw water fee for the developer goes up 3% a year over the course of this tenure. And the ratepayers are going up 10.5%. If you, at some point, what if they both went up by the same percentage every year?
Good point, yeah.
And maybe it ends up being 5 and 5, or 6 and 6, or something, where you're generating the same amount of revenue. But
We
it's
can
just,
definitely look
you
at
just
that.
have an equal
But
jump.
I'm concerned about the elasticity of demand issue.
On the housing.
Still.
Then we don't need any water.
True. That's true.
That's
But you've
for sure.
already, if it's NISP, we've already committed
you're
to
already
the
committed,
project.
and
We're
then
committed to that.
What are they gonna do, sue us? Let's sell off our interest to,
We'll sell the farm.
yeah.
Once you run through this one.
John didn't hear that.
So this is one of just the benchmarking things that we completed last year, because when we were talking about increasing this fee by so much, we were interested in learning about what our competitors or neighbors were doing, and seeing if we were aligned with that. So over here you can see, this is basically what we were current last year, and this additional water resource fee was just the $475 as a NISP fee that we were charging at that time. We then added the 15,000 onto that, which is the rest of the orange there. And so you can see where we had proposed to end up with Fort Collins, Loveland, Greeley, and North Polk County. So through this analysis, what we were looking at for this non-dual proposed the tallest one with the orange there, was that it was a large increase, but we weren't by any means above where any of your neighbors are. And so that was really what we were trying to prove, that although that it maybe 15 wasn't the exact number that we were gonna end up with, but it wasn't totally out of, left field and what all of our neighbors were charging as well for the people who are involved in NISP.
And I'll just say, I need to add to this, there's been some changes to what you're seeing here, especially for your numbers. I'd rather focus on the Greeley, Northwell, Fort Collins numbers here in total, because one of the things we probably didn't get really well last year was the non-cash portion of the cash and new requirement, which is not really reflected in these numbers. So, we would add basically double what the fee was to that portion of the fee. So, everything would have shown higher for you. But we're still talking today, if it's 20,000 plus the 5, we're at 25.7. We're still within market here, within these folks. So I think for us, and maybe for staff, it'd be good if we can get like an upper threshold for you, what you would wanna charge the development community with the standard CPI increase beyond that. What you would wanna see for an upper rate increase. And then what you'd like to see as a composition between developers and ratepayers paying of the NISP project. So we've started with the 25%, 25.75 here. If that's a good number, we won't go above 25% rate funded as part of our parameters. We won't go above an additional fee of 21,000, let's say. Something like that. I think that would be helpful for us. Dean, got anything you want to add to that?
I think so. I just wanted to get the feel for the concept of what y'all wanted to do here. And we'll sharpen the pencil on this, but as Rod was saying, is there some bridge too far, I guess, for lack of a better word, that you don't want us to go over when we start penciling this again?
But I think if you could slide the scale a couple places, like you said, don't go more than 25, but maybe try like 85-15 or 90-10.
Yeah.
And so we can compare some of those scenarios.
Well, I think like David's scenario, I mean, really, if you could get that balance almost somewhere where
Yeah, I
both
like
are going
that
up
too.
6% a year or
I
something,
like
if,
that.
that's gonna be somewhere in that probably 85-15 range, but that's not a bad,
Just
goal
easier
to that.
story to tell.
Well,
I,
yeah,
I understand the
Seems fair.
concept that, if we take on the debt, which we will, and regardless if there's no additional development, we still have the debt payment.
Yeah.
So one thing, and maybe it was in there, but I wanna see, like 2025, what's our annual payment? Because I wanna think worst case scenario, that if development for whatever reason stops, where in our budget would we make our payments? I mean, we come out of our capital, probably come out of sales tax, other things, of course, so I kinda wanna know what that number is too. And I think it was in there.
So what we'll do
Our
for
debt
you,
payment,
So,
John,
yeah, it wasn't in there, but I think about 30 million was like 3.5 million.
about 3.5, 4 million a year,
But-
I figured 3 to 5 million
Yeah,
a
but
year
the-
is what we're gonna have to pay.
The caveat being that there's other financing options that can lower that
Right,
interest
I
rate.
heard you say that, yeah.
Yeah.
But somewhere between $3 and $5 million a year is what we're gonna have to come up with.
Mhm.
Okay, that's what I need to know, so that, I wanna think, like I said.
and what we'll do for you, once we dial in on a specific one or two
Okay.
scenarios, then we'll rerun at 75% growth, 50% growth, and tell you what the impacts are. The impacts are, it's gonna transverse over to the rate side and the fee. Both.
Let's go back to the debt to, wait, and this, right now, today's money is 99 million.
Yeah.
So where'd you get 30 million? I just heard you say it, I mean.
That's what we'd be,
Cash funding, 65 million, debt financing, 30 million.
Okay.
In this plan.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And I think though, Ken, your comment, if I understood you, initially was almost stress test. Right now, they said their model has some 4% home growth next 2 years, 565 homes per year. And then thereafter, 332 homes per year for the next 3 to 10 years. Well, what if you drop that? What if the 332 turns into 200? And the 565 is 450, I mean, does it just blow up?
Oh, yes, it does.
Yeah.
And we'll look at that.
yeah,
one.
and we looked at those pretty hard as staff, and we had a pretty good discussion, actually trying to lower the projections a little bit, to have more on the conservative side,
Yeah.
but, you know, looking at our previous 10 years, these numbers bear out pretty good, but, you know, that doesn't predict the future.
We're spending 25 million a year on capital improvements. I mean, what the mean was, we would cut back on other things because we owe 5 million or whatever, so. It would not be disaster, it would not be good, but.
As you play with that scenario, and if you're able to do what I said, or what other have said as scenarios, could you also add a line in that table that shows the amount of cash generated in aggregate by each of these fees? Just trying to get a feel for what the developer's fee is generating versus the rate there.
And our total fee with NISP isn't gonna,
Get you whatever you want.
isn't gonna end at 99 million, is it?
No.
I mean, that's only if we get an answer next year. What about, it takes another 10 to 15 years before it even comes online.
Well, costs going up.
So there's gonna be, I mean,
already gone up.
But
so is
90
this
days-
taking all that into account, whatever those cost escalations are gonna be?
We have
in
to
order
stick, so to speak,
Oh.
right? So we're really, we're leaving it as the best information we have right now. And so the best information we have right now is a $4 million cash call to the town for easements, land acquisitions, kind of front end, project
And you think
stuff.
that's enough? I mean, that's what you've heard,
The good news is
or who's ever,
That was the last, yeah,
that's
the
what we've
last,
heard.
the last
That's the
number.
way
That's
it
the
comes first.
latest meeting.
So you can't tell us if it's gonna be snowing in February and 2025? We want an
I
answer.
probably wouldn't be here if I could.
Okay,
It's complicated, I know, and you guys are probably brain fried from your night already, so we'll be back again, you know, and I think we've got enough direction now. You guys feel? Shane?
but I think we would want, I mean, I think this is an important discussion, and we need to move sooner rather than later. So, I mean, last time we saw you was April, and now it's, you know, I mean, that's great, but I think if we can up the next time we get this information, I don't want it to be another 6 or 7 months. I mean, because the longer we wait, the more it affects our numbers too.
I'd like to
We need
really do that
notification
quickly as you can, Shane. I mean,
Right, yeah, no, we're actively underway. We wanted to get these guys on board tonight to give you guys a couple slides, to get some feel from you, to get you back that this is an active project. We're gonna be back, I think, probably January.
sooner if we can. We can pound some
We've
stuff
got
out.
December 24th open, are you guys?
I don't know what your meeting times are, so that's totally.
I mean, in the
Yeah,
meantime, we
for
are
sure.
gonna be starting some communication with our citizens, so that, I mean, about water in general, about how water is expensive, it's a valuable commodity. So that by the time we start maybe alluding to some things in a very broad way, but again, it's about, there's an education piece and process too, that I think we wanna make sure we deliver, so that no one's gonna like it, but at least there's hopefully a better understanding as to why we have to go down the path that we're going down.
Yeah, the communication for this meeting was good, it went out to the
Right.
public.
Very good.
And to the mayor's request, I guess, Dean, if you can get us the slide decks we've seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah,
get you that, we'll
I've
get you
got
that
notes
updated
and all that,
scenario.
we'll get them all. So the mayor said hard copy. So what we could do is, we could email them out to everybody if you just want them digitally, and then we could also just have hard copies put in everybody's, folders as well.
You just put them in a binder. 'Cause I think it's gonna end up with a fair number of pages, everything we looked at.
Okay?
I'll bring you the binder.
If it's in great.
It's a cost.
Yeah. Do you have a 3-hole punch too?
I do.
Thank you.
I could, one hole at a time.
Okay, so you have what you need.
Apologize to
move
Crystal
forward.
right now, she's the one that's gonna.
Yeah.
Much more to come.
You just gave them over.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you
Thank you
very
all.
much. So I think that concludes our work session this evening, does it not?
You'll need a motion.
Oh, we are in a special meeting, so I will need a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn. Mayor.
A motion on the floor and a second. All in favor, signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.
That didn't take you long.
Really, 9 o'clock.
3.5. Oh, 4